the UK, two allies, and London, pay for it using the money of their own people. The people of the US, as well as the people of the UK, have to understand that involuntarily they are involved in this situation, not directly, but they are sponsoring international terrorism. All of these crimes are being investigated thoroughly by the Investigative Committee of Russia. We'll find the responsible ones and punish them, and we leave to us the right to respond firmly. Cluster munitions are being used by Kiev regime. These cluster munitions were provided by the US. On the 22nd of July, Rostislav Zhuravlov, correspondent of RIA Novosti, died because of the attack with such munitions. 4 of his colleagues were injured. On Saturday, these munitions were used to shell a village Zhuravlovka. 21 artillery projectiles, 3 cluster munitions were used, as well as suicide drones and grenade launcher.
The international community of politicians of different states and relevant organizations called not to supply cluster munitions to the Kiev regime and to use them in Ukraine. They underline that such activities will violate humanitarian norms, unless no other arguments cannot bring to senses the Ukrainian fascists and their Western and London curators. The only thing that can stop them, this is a tough and adequate response. I would like to remind the same way the international community was frustrated from the plans of the United States, Great Britain, United Kingdom, and its satellites to attack Iraq. And I remember it well when the international community released letters and even made lively queues in order to prevent the crimes of the United States. Washington ignored such statements, and they did what they did. We are highly ignored such statements, and they did what they did. We are highly aware of what Washington is and implemented right now. And this scale, taking into account the large monies dedicated to the Kiev regime, being a tool in Washington's hands to implement aggressive intentions against our country. So these scales are unprecedented in terms of amount of money, of military aid, allocations of money, and political support rendered. The Ukrainian authorities continue to fight the monuments to Soviet soldiers. Within one night, on the 22nd of July, the Nazi vandals in Lvov region demolished 9 such memorials. They demolished the monuments in the settlements Orekhovchik, Brody, Rudniki, Sukhovolia, Yezlovchik, Panikovitsa, Semiginov, Skilevka, and Podkamень. According to SME, within the last days in Lvov, the people tried to open the burial place and steal the ashes of intelligence officer of the Soviet Union, Nikolai Kuzintov. This seems like a necrophilia. During the Great Patriotic War, Nikolai Kuzintov killed more than a dozen of German generals. And now I'm calling to my Western non-partners who say that there are no neo-Nazis in Ukraine, but you revived them and you are actively sponsoring them. 80 years ago, you failed to do that. And right now it's a revanche. So they demolish, in first term, the monuments to the soldiers of the Great Patriotic War. The Ukrainian fascists are best in demolishing their monuments. It is useless to appeal to the conscience of the current Kiev regime. As soon as the targets of the special military operation will be achieved, all demolished monuments in Ukraine will be restored. Russia has specialists on post-war restoration. These dedicated services, for example, they restored the Palmyra monument in Syria. Unlike the Kiev regime, we honor the heroes of the Great Patriotic War, which dedicated themselves to the fight against the Nazis. On the 22nd of July, 1944, 79 years ago, a battle on the Broad was ended up where the Red Army defeated 8 German divisions, which included the 14th Grenadier Division of SS Galician, formed from Ukrainian traitors. The fascist army showed themselves in punitive actions, and they showed inability to fight back the regular Soviet divisions in the open battles. The German command called Galician an armed rebel, and this is a quotation. And we can say the same about the Kiev regime. But I would add, if earlier Galician during the Great Patriotic War was called by the fascists themselves as an armed rebel, but today the Kiev regime can be called an armed rebel armed by the West. Times change, but the quality of the fascist Ukrainian armed formations, the moral and the morale of their combatants remain the same. Washington believes that war is good for the world economy. No, that's true, and I can prove that. The finance minister of US, Janet Yellen, said that. And in order to help the world in the economic development, the US official called to double aid to the Kiev regime. In the country where men call women men and vice versa, and many say that there are several people in one body and they receive a note in order to help with their psychological problems, which means that there are 2 souls in one body. So that is possible in the country. And so the finance secretary of the United States says that it's possible for all adequate people. This military conflict is a misery. This is a loss of life, grief of many peoples for everyone, but not for the American government. This is yet another pretext to think over their own profit. And it was the same earlier. It is easy to make geostrategical plans when you are fighting with some other hands. I'm talking about the United States. According to the Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, Washington administration consults Kiev on when Ukraine should include the main forces in their counterattack. And then they say that they're not a party to the conflict. And that's the fight of the Ukrainian people for their independence. There's no sense. And they admit that the Ukrainian army suffered significant losses. And the Western Command decides when to send to slaughter the Ukrainian soldiers. And Ukraine should resent and grudge against this. But those who were paid for this, as Zelensky said, at the very expensive resorts, they have no time to think of what is happening with their peoples. Many people say that the first targets of Ukrainian snipers target the military medical personnel. They are trying to target the military personnel. They even announce rewards for the killing of doctors. I would like to remind that the Geneva Convention reads that medical personnel, including for evacuation of the injured and sanitary agencies, do not refer to combatants and military objects. They cannot be attacked and should be respected by all parties of the conflict. The Kiev regime ignores such norms for 2 reasons. They have Nazi nature and they use terrorist methods. And this is their characteristics. And I mean that we cannot find any other characteristics to their actions. Because for many time, the international community tried to choose some words in order to call this regime. Someone called democracy, search for new identity. But in fact, it is quite simple. Their identity is very old, the Nazi identity, but the methods which they resort to, that's, of course, innovation. There's a combination of methodology of international terrorists with technical potential of developed Western states. On the 22nd of July, the defense minister of Italy expressed hope that the Ukrainian conflict will end soon. He said that it's in the moment to do the most to search for the peaceful solution. Of course, such an intention deserves support. But there is one slight difference. These words, in this case, has nothing to do with the actions. You need to stop pumping Kiev with the weapons. There is no sense. The Kiev regime not only uses these weapons for terrorist purposes against our country, but it shares its arms with other terrorists all over the world, and I can prove it. For example, the late report of Pentagon, which we can believe in the West. Information in this document was disseminated in the American mass media. It states that the part of the Western arms sent to Ukraine was stolen. The document states that between February and September 2022, the Americans had no chance to supervise the arms supplied, and only at the end of October 2022, they sent the relevant commission to Ukraine. And what was happening before October 2022? For more than half a year, they supplied weapons without any control. And we are aware of what the Kiev officials represent themselves. The Zelensky does not care about his grandparents. And now you're talking about the weapons delivered to them. There were so many weapons that gone on black markets. And does this Pentagon Commission safeguard any guarantees from plunderers and resellers? We can only guess. It is obvious that this will come soon in different regions of the world, and unfortunately is now in the hands of terrorists and criminals. So all these events, including facts, which we receive every single minute, prove the relevance of talks and objectives of the special military operation. The 27th of July, the Donetsk People's Republic commemorates the commemoration of children, which was unleashed by the Kiev regime. Almost 200 children died in this region. Many people were injured. The youngest girl victim was only 27 days, and this victim was died. Children die from artillery shapes, sniper shooting, mines planted by the Ukrainian military in 2014 and 2015 at forest paths and close to different lakes. Children are seriously injured. There are 11 cases where children were mined with landmines, Lepestok. Throughout 9 years, the children in Donbass grow older under permanent shootings of Ukraine. The Ukrainian neo-Nazis cynically attack kindergarten schools, medical institutions, and we cited several references when the Kiev children declare that they have their own, that the Ukrainians deploy their arms and equipment not only in civilian infrastructure objects and in hospitals, kindergartens. Throughout many years, the US state and its allies actively pumped Ukraine with weapons, which is used by the Kiev regime against civilians, including the minor. All those who supply weapons are accomplices in the crimes against children and must be held accountable. If you just think over this is the result of some year and a half, you will be mistaken. So there can be any mistakes. So let us recall the President Poroshenko words, who said, appealing to his citizens, that the citizens of Donbass, including children, and mainly he spoke about children, will live in the houses. So they profess then, so sellers. And that's what they profess. And manifest their attitude to people. There is one sort people and other people who should not have the right to life. This is the logic of neocolonialism, imperialism, neo-Nazi fascism, and right now this is just being brought up to a new level. Recalling the lives and the children who died, we say we won't forget and we won't forgive. This cannot be forgiven. This leads to an end of a history. This is our duty, that all the children in Donbass and in Russia, that the children won't die from bullets or shells of the Kiev regime. That is what our Russian military are fighting for during the special military operation. Now as for situation in Ukraine, but another aspect. On the 26th of July, Russia initiated a session of the UN Security Council, so it will be tonight. So on the topic on persecutions of the Russian Orthodox Church, this will be the second meeting on persecutions of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church organized by our country. I mean the meetings at the UN Security Council and discussions of this debate. The country convenes and organizes this year for the second time. This is apart from additional annual reports which were sent to international organizations. The focus of discussion will focus on the deterioration of the situation, on the persecution of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. In particular, Russia will bring to attention inadmissible harassment, arrests, and beatings of clergy, monks, and parishes. We focus that these threats, which emerged after adoption of illegitimate discrimination solutions, which provoked the seizure of some course of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra. We will focus on looting of Orthodox shrines in connection with the export of cultural and historical values from the Kiev-Pechersk conducted in the worst traditions of neocolonialism. Can you remind when the United States and the United Kingdom, other NATO countries, invaded Iraq? They looted overnight the museums of Baghdad, the richest expositions and collections. And overnight, these appeared in some private auctions. That is the case. And they go to these countries to impose democracy in order to control the resource base and to export all cultural heritage. Today, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website released a report on illegitimate actions of the Kiev regime against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, against clergy parishes. This report shows systematic discrimination against canonic church. This is just a small part of a period from 22 to 23. This does not mean that we will stop on this. We will systematize all these information. This is just a report for 1 year. Many information on some separate cases cannot be published because it will jeopardize the lives and health of the clergy and the believers, which are going through tough times and martyrdom in Ukraine. On this 20th of July, an address of the Vicar of the Holy Kiev-Pechersk Lavra was published. Can you listen to his words? Said in 2023, I write you from the Lukyanovsk detention center of Kiev, where in 1920 and 30 my brothers were imprisoned. I was forced to leave the Lavra, to betray you and your family in order to blackmail and inspections of the security services of Ukraine. I didn't do so. All the accusations of these are all lies. These canny eyewitnesses and among our brotherhood cannot accuse me of anything. Our lawyers are very experienced, but no one hears to them, listens to them. I tell this because in my detention center there are all political prisoners. The decisions of the judge has been prepared in advance. The prosecutor, the investigator, all these are the same. End of quote. 2023. Ukraine. It is hard to imagine that in our 21st century we are witnessing large-scale persecutions on this huge church, which has no spots, and the West is deaf and blind. The same as human rights organizations, and they are ready to uproar the public in not so high-profile cases. We've seen a lot. And here, they keep silence. Why? Not because they do not see or hear, because they have created this crisis and this tragedy, because this is man-made crisis. This does not have any natural causes. It has been collected in small parts for many years, and then it was burnt out. The report cites facts and circumstances which show the whole political and legal abuse against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, flagrant systematic violation of the Kiev regime of the rights of the Orthodox Christians. It says in details discriminatory Ukrainian laws, secret services actions of municipal authorities. They cite numerous facts when the Ukrainian churches were captured, the communities were registered, state and regional authorities were exerted to push violence against monks were fixed, contains responses of some human rights organizations.
I'm sure that if that report was published by the religious representatives, Orthodox religious or some other religions, they would use such was a satanism. We use international vocabulary and international definitions, and even without starting any philosophical considerations or debates, without using some religious norms, just staying in the context of international law, we see that everything is violated. Everything that in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years was elaborated by the humanity to protect religion, to protect religious diversity and the freedom of faith. The actions of Kiev regime amazed with inhumane wickedness and cynicism. They organize raids of priests and parishioners. They plant evidence on them. They insult their victims, making them to undress, making photos of them, and then publishing these photos in social networks with insulting comments. The world has seen all of this many times. Many believers are being beaten up with legs, even when they're on the ground. People break into the churches during the services. American platforms are not even trying to segregate these types of videos or trying to find these videos to eliminate them. And there are a lot of videos on YouTube with such videos of witnesses of these events. But when we see the violence that is distributed on YouTube, maybe YouTube should do something about this. The situation of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church today is the responsibility of the West and the US. In particular, the geopolitical plays with religions, manipulation of Constantinople patriarchy that has become a novice of Washington, resulted in suffering of a lot of believers. I repeat that the crisis of Orthodox Church in Ukraine is something unnatural. It was conducted deliberately by the US and its satellites. The publication of the report will draw attention of people who care. I know that there are such people in the West, and the world international community does not consist only of those who has no spirit at all, but also of those who want to protect justice and truth. There are international organizations that care. There are media that have conscience in the West. And I'm sure that there will be a reaction, and this report has been translated into several languages. Now let's speak about UNESCO. We are bewildered by the press release published on UNESCO website. They speak about condemning Russian attacks on buffer zone of the World Heritage Site Historical Center of Odessa. The Director General of UNESCO, Ms. Audrey Azoulay, a French citizen, another time exceeded her authority, making Russia responsible for aggression attacks and deliberate destruction of cultural objects. And before this, where was Ms. Azoulay and her secretariat 10 years ago? They didn't see anything in Ukraine. How long can we speak about the number of monuments that were destructed and being destructed right now? We firmly reject the insinuations about our country, about violation by our country of Convention of the Protection of Cultural Heritage in the case of armed conflict, because we see many facts how UAF uses cultural and educational facilities for their munitions and military equipment. Ms. Azoulay could provide quotations of the government of Ukrainian government that feels pride because of putting their personnel and military equipment in such facilities. The Minister of Russia plans its operations in fully implementing its obligations. First of all, our goals, our objectives are military infrastructure. In case of Odessa, high-precision weapons were used to impact the places where terrorist acts against Russia were prepared with unmanned boats. On the 7th of July, Crimean Bridge was attacked and 2 people died. They were mother and father. A girl was left orphan. She will not be an orphan in our country. Yes, she lost her parents, but all our country, everyone supported her as one. They declared that now we're all her family. Where was UNESCO? Where are photos of this family, of this child? On the walls of the headquarters of UNESCO in Paris? Where are the titles of newspapers of how Ms. Azoulay just expressed something, some kind of sentiment to these people? Maybe buffer zone of the World Heritage Site Historical Center of Odessa is more important than this. They created this term, buffer zone of the historical center. And what about the historical center itself? That was the real center where there was the monument to Catherine the Great. And does Ms. Azoulay think anything about this? What else can we say about the historical center of Odessa? We understand that this decision that was taken very fast with the violation of the rules of procedure of including this site to the World Heritage List had only one purpose: to cover with the UNESCO mechanisms the military actions of Kiev regime on the territory of the city. This is how it happens, and we blame the UNESCO Secretariat for this. In helping the terrorist activity of Kiev regime, this is what you do. And if we're speaking about caring about cultural heritage, it is not what is happening, because otherwise you would ask Kiev regime many questions. Where are hundreds and even thousands of monuments and cultural objects? Maybe they are not all World Heritage sites, but this is a systemic problem. This is genocide, cultural genocide. I'm not speaking about language, about literature, burning of books. We're speaking just about monuments. Just the day before it, as I already said, The monument to Catherine the Great was just in the center of the city. And what UNESCO did anything at all. Despite the repeated calls of Russian Federation, the Director General just ignored Ukrainian terrorist act against Moscow, Kremlin, and Red Square. Maybe they just don't have this World Heritage Site, or maybe it is not so important. These are questions to you, Ms. Ozile. This violates the Convention on the Protection of Cultural Values in case of armed conflict 1954 and about the protection of World Heritage and Natural Heritage 1972. UNESCO, in fact, indulges Kiev regime and has turned a blind eye on the damage by the UAF to educational, cultural, and scientific facilities in Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic. Let's speak about nature. Ms. Ozile doesn't care about depleted uranium munitions. There is no such topic on the agenda of UNESCO. With regret, we see that all of this is done to support Ukrainian neo-Nazis and their Western supervisors, to discredit Russia and professional actions of Russian army. The UNESCO Charter orders the Director General and its personnel to refrain from any actions that could affect their position as international officials. The increasing bias and prejudice of Secretariat will add points to Ms. Ozile and French internal political arena, but it will not help to consolidate peace and security in the sphere of cooperation of peoples, in the sphere of education, science, and culture. This is a quotation from the Charter of the UNESCO, and it will not help to solve Ukrainian crisis. And I have a question to Ms. Ozile. If you were Secretary General of the organization that in the 1940s or 1945, when this organization was not created, would you be protecting Reichstag, or maybe you would protect something else? Once again, just pay your attention to the terrorist activities of the Kiev regime and understand that these people, as they think they are, those who have lost their human aspect, use terrorist methods against civil objects. We'll continue to speak about UNESCO today, another example of double standards. Not just double standards, but criminal double standards, and the use of international organizations in covering Kiev regime crimes. So we have analyzed the activities of the LIC Special Monitoring Commission in Ukraine. Their mandate was stopped on the 31st of March 2022. Our analysis showed that the management of this field presence of LSE started to serve the Western supervisor of Kiev regime, and its activity has become biased. It is not just being biased. They play just on one side. All the efforts to monitor situation in Ukraine were focused on Donbass. We are speaking about manifestations of nationalism, persecution of Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Russian language. All of this was ignored. They turned a blind eye on fortification works, military capacity building of Ukrainian forces. We recognize the merits of many observers of Special Monitoring Mission in the first years of activities, when their presence, in fact, deterred the Kiev regime. Many Russians worked in the Special Monitoring Commission, and they did a lot of useful, not to our country, but in general, first of all to the OSCE and to the principle on which this organization is based. But some employees of this mission, including the citizens of Ukraine, acted contrary to the mandate of the mission. They were spying, they were gathering and transmitting information to foreign special services and UAF. These were information about the location of military equipment, dislocation of units, information of plants in LPR and DPR. And the equipment of Special Monitoring Commission was that was used to register the violations of regime were used by the UAF to adjust fire. Because of this, many civilians in Donbass died. Law enforcement organs opened criminal cases against suspected people who worked before in the Special Monitoring Commission. Secretary General of the OSCE, Helge Schmidt, is trying to whitewash the work of this commission and to present these arrested employees of the mission as innocent victims. The Permanent Council in Vienna on the 13th of July, she raised question about the exchange or liberation. And if we're speaking about the exchange, it means that they in fact admit their guilt. Let's speak about the Norway report on the exploration of mineral resources in the Norway continental shelf near the archipelago Spitsbergen. We have to focus our attention on our position about the legal status of the shelf. We think that the attempts of Norway to withdraw the search of exploration of mineral resources of continental shelf of archipelago Spitsbergen from the action of the Treaty on Spitsbergen 1920 are illegal. This shelf is natural part of the land of archipelago, and they form a united whole. The legal regime established by this treaty covers the shelf of archipelago according to the borders established in the first article of the treaty. Norway cannot have any exclusive interests or rights without the agreement of all the participants of the Treaty of 1920, and would like to remind that would like to remind Norway that their sovereignty on archipelago Spitsbergen is not unconditional. The attempts to unilaterally regulate the exploration of resources on shelf is the violation by Norway of the regime of the Treaty of 1920. We have repeatedly called Norway to stop this illegal international practice, including in the context of sea biological resources industry in the Spitsbergen waters and in the context of exploration of mineral resources. Several words about the memorandum that was transmitted to the International Court of Justice. It was presented on the 25th of July on the legal consequences of the occupation of Palestine territories by Israel. This report was requested of the court. Russian party presented evaluation of the Israel's policy that impedes the Palestine people from implementing their right for self-determination, as well as other violations of rights by Israel as occupying state. For instance, the illegality of Israeli settlements on the occupied territories. Russia is a friend of Palestine and Israel, as well as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. We are participating in the quartet of international intermediaries on a Middle East settlement, as that is why we think that advisory report should help to solve the conflict on the basis of international law enshrined in the UN Security Council documents, General Assembly documents, and Human Rights Council documents. It means that Israel and Palestine have to have a responsibility to renew direct negotiations to reach just and solid settlement that will result in the creation of an independent, viable, and territorially continuous Palestine state with the capital in the eastern Jerusalem, and other states and international organizations have to contribute to this process. We are sure that free implementation of this agreement will be the most effective means to stop occupation, to stop the violation of the rights of Palestinian people, and to give them the right to implement their right for self-determination according to this two-state solution, and it will neutralize threats to Israel's security. 70 years ago, Korean War ended. It ended with the armistice agreement. This tragedy is one of the bloodiest military conflicts in the 20th century that caused untold suffering to Korean people and claimed lives of millions of people. Unfortunately, in the recent decades, peace and stability were not reached on Peninsula. The situation there goes around in circles when relative calm gives way to a new escalation. We hope that tragic events of those years will not repeat. We need practical steps to diffuse military political tensions that is inspired by the West, to restore trust, to renew equal and mutual respectful dialogue in the interests of creating solid architecture of comprehensive, indivisible security on Korean Peninsula and in several northeastern Asia as a whole. On the occasion of this memorable day, that is being an anniversary of the victory of Korean people in DPRK, the Minister of Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and our delegation will visit Korean People's Democratic Republic on the 25th, 26th of July, and we hope that will contribute to cooperation between two countries. This year we celebrate 220 years on the 5th of December since the birth and 150 years since the death of a famous Russian poet, Fyodor Tyutchev, and I'll remind that his life was directly connected to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He was a diplomat that understood very well political structure of the world and was a poet who managed to present in artistic form his legacy and his calls. For many years, he was a senior censor in the foreign ministry. He analyzed all the foreign media, so he was our colleague. He was one of the first who presented Russophobia, who introduced Russophobia into the political vocabulary. He, in dynamics, observed how the position of West was developing, a position to progressive development of our country. And this resulted in the big war. That is what he predicted.
Being good analyst, Fyodor Tyutchev understood the rooted reasons for Russophobia in the West, and many were seen in his poetry. He was familiar with the methods of Western propaganda to subjugate Russia and these double standards. He reflected in some of his poems. It was not long ago, on the European soul, where the lies has been established. All that we're talking about for many years are here in these 4 lines. Fyodor Tyutchev was a genius poet. He was also a patriot. His ideas of Fyodor Tyutchev has not been old, and they explain everything and make us think over many things. On the 28th of July, we'll celebrate the Independence Day of Peru. Russia and Peru has many years of long-standing traditions and friendship. During the exchange of messages between our ministers of foreign affairs on the occasion of the 160th anniversary of diplomatic relations, the Russian-Peruvian ties have historical meaning and characterized by the spirit of friendship, cooperation, brotherhood. This is the objective reality of relations of the two peoples with the thousands of years of history and their own coinciding interests. The Russian-Peruvian solidarity was proved during the devastating earthquake in Peru in 1970, which claimed tens of thousands of lives. The rescuers, doctors, pilots, and other specialists sent to the Yungay city were at the same time the ambassadors of goodwill who brought our humanitarian ties on a sure footing. The tragic page of our bilateral relations was July 18, 1970. This day, our transport plane crashed over the North Atlantic. It held medical personnel and rescuers, as well as humanitarian cargo. This air crash claimed lives of 22 our compatriots. We are grateful to our Peruvian friends who organizes in Peru, in the embassy, a wreath-laying ceremony to honor those who died in this air crash. It is important that the peoples of Russia and Peru share the same values, and among these fundamental concepts These are the true understanding of such concepts as family, justice, democracy, human rights, and many other concepts. On the international arena, this is a principle of equal rights of states, their sovereignty, non-interference in domestic affairs. We are persuaded that the attempts of some states to undermine these values and use them as a pretext to invade and implement their aggressive neocolonial policy will receive a wise response in terms of the interests of our peoples. So, on the occasion of the National Day of Peru, I would like to recall the Festival of Latin American and Caribbean Culture, which was opened on the 21st of July, which will screen the Peruvian cinema and Peruvian cuisine, which was received rave reviews of our guests and festival participants. On the 28th of July has been soon the baptism of Russia. It is celebrated on the day to honor the Saint Vladimir, the Prince Saint Vladimir, who was called in his lifetime for Red Sun, for his helpful attitude to people. This celebration was first held at the state level, was many years ago, and in our modern history, this event is being celebrated as an official commemorative event since 2010. The baptism of Russia, associated with the historical choice of Saint Vladimir, had great significance in the fate of the homeland. Christianity, reaffirmed as a state unifying religion and its Byzantine origin, predetermined the future pathway of Russia and became a stronghold of Orthodox Church. The baptism of the Rus shaped the unified nation, which does not even exclude regional peculiarities. Moreover, it provides some other fertile land for future development, and this refers not only to national cultures, but to different religious movements in Russia. Orthodoxy impacted a lot on all spheres of life, and it is reflected in our rich legacy of culture. On the 30th of July, the world community will celebrate an International Day of fighting against human trade. A global plan of action on human trade was introduced. The relevance of these events is indisputable. We will release additional substantial report, and now I stand ready to answer your question, but the only thing I would like to ask, take into account that I have no time, almost no time left, so please be brief. Do we have International Life with us? Good afternoon, Marina Vladimir. Can you comment? Another act of burning of the Quran before the embassy of Iraq in Denmark. Of course, there was another provocative act on burning of the Quran on the 21st of July. They burnt this sacred book of Muslims in front of the embassy of Iraq in Denmark. So these acts, unfortunately, are not rare in this country. In January, as you remember, the far-right leader, hardline policy Rasmus Paludan, burned the Quran in front of the consular mission of the embassy of Denmark in Denmark. The same was held in one of the mosques in Colombia. We see religious radicals feeling that they are left impunishable. In many European capitals, obsessed with maniacal obsession, burn and commit blatant crimes against Islam. But these crimes are perceived in our country, as well as by some other confessions, Orthodox confessions, as the same crime. So we need to understand, in our country, many confessions sees this as a crime. That's not a freedom of speech. It has nothing to do. It's a kind of a malicious aspiration to hurt some other people, to show hatred to the religious convictions without any adequate rationale. I can cite you yet another example from Copenhagen, the 9th of February 2014. Adequate people were frustrated by the fact that many children came to the Copenhagen Zoo to see how the giraffe is killed. I hope that you remember the zoo workers in the front of the children and their parents, and they broadcasted it online and gathering people in advance, they shot the animal and they fed this meat to other animals because they saw that it would be inadmissible to throw away such meat. This procedure, it took 3 hours for this procedure. And then the veterinarians, there was an excuse to anatomy of animals. They just showed at a lively animal. I remember the zoo authorities said that they are proud of their colleagues, that they provided a unique opportunity for children to familiarize themselves with the anatomy of giraffe, which could not be understood in the photos or some other specialized materials. And for these purposes, in front of the children, they killed an animal, they separated it, and then they fed with this meat other animals. And these are all the same concepts. I'm thrilled, I'm frustrated by such events, and there was no word at the state level. There were no claims, accusations. Can you imagine the children who saw this, how they will grow up if they are not explained that that's not the case, that cannot be done? All these things are happening because the authorities of the Western authorities, under the guise of neoliberal values, just let the process run its course. But this is a man-made crisis. They do not prevent such provocations, and moreover, they provide licenses for it. But this does not make other people condemn such acts. So those who commit such acts, they can do everything. And all those who believe that this is beyond the human nature, they do not have a word, a say. The European politicians just distorted its fundamental principle. The freedom of one person ends up where the freedom of another begins. We strongly condemn this and other extremist acts of aggression to show disrespect to any religion. We believe that mockery on the feelings of the believers is not demonstration of a freedom of speech and has nothing to do with it. All this is made under the guise of such acts, and this is a manifestation of aggressive barbarian and xenophobia. Russia has always been opposed against insulting the feelings of the believers and thus blatant violations of their rights, as what we've seen in Denmark. If authorities do not intervene and suppress such acts, this will lead that radicalism will get worse, and lawlessness, as you know, does not choose its victims, and ordinary people will suffer, as well as the diplomatic corps, regardless of their beliefs and convictions. We believe that the Denmark authorities will stop condoning, inciting interreligious hatred, and make the utmost against radicals. I have another question. As for the shooting, our military correspondent died, and his colleagues were seriously injured. These are another crimes of the Kiev regime. Were there any responses in view of the biased attitudes of such institutes towards Russian journalists? As you know, we've recorded that Madame Azoulay has finally used its mandate and drew public attention to the death of the Russian journalist. At the same time, we saw the same thing, this double standards, dual nature of the statement, where this killing was called just a death of a journalist. Has he just died? He was killed. If Madame Azoulay doesn't know, I will explain. Instead of condemnation, they talk about deploration. And that's quite logic. They cannot condemn death in terms of Madame Azoulay. But if we are talking about the killing, and this is a killing, so we should condemn it. And that was not the case. At the same time, the resolution of condemnation of violence against journalists adopted at the 29th session of the UNESCO conference on November 12, 1997, gives a mandate to the Director General to condemn such acts. The name of the resolution contains this term, condemnation. And Madame Azoulay resorts to such a word when it comes to Western Ukrainian mass media. This is a kind of segregation. This is intolerance on racial ground. That is what UNESCO should fight against. This is a flagrant violation of charter documents by its Director General. This is both a violation and a dangerous precedent. Despite the demarche of the Russian Federation, we have not received condemnation of the international community of the bloody massacres over Oleg Klokov, Vladlen Tatarsky. The Director General ignored the recent assassinations on Russian main editors and journalists, TV presenters. There was no word, and that's not a question of time. If we talk about Margaret Simonyan, it was a recent assassination, but we can see that she received warnings and threats for many years. Assassination of Vladimir Siloy was perpetrated a year ago, and we've seen the investigation results. Madame Azoulay kept silence then, and she keeps silence today. We hope that the Director General will faithfully discharge her duties with regard to all the victims of the mass media, regardless of their citizenship, nationality. But if UNESCO believed that it could call this victim, as for Teresa Ribeiro, the OSCE Freedom of Mass Media representative, who also deprived of the sense of her position, she just stroked her comment and showed unprofessionalism. Her plain statement in Twitter cannot be a thoughtful response to this inhumane, in respect of this inhumane attack of the Kiev regime with the use of cluster munitions. 1 was killed and 3 were seriously injured. So we cannot ignore such a terrible crime. And this OSCE institute signed that it was not professional and that it has political attitude. So is Russia Today with us? Russia Today, are you with us? Good afternoon, Madame Zakharova. The first question. The General of the Bureau addressed to Antonio Guterres with a request to send UN Security Council decision to appoint Mr. Schmidt on the post of High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina, as it is provided for the General Framework Agreement for Peace of 1995. The UN Secretary General said that the United Nations has not set the date on the agreement, is not a member of the Council on the implementation of peaceful arrangements, the only relevant body with a mandate to appoint such high representatives in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So what is the legal status of Mr. Schmidt and why he avoids answering this question? And what will Russia do if Schmidt will try to impose his new laws? The question, the legal status of the German citizen Christian Schmidt, would be advisable to address to the migration authorities of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the state where we see him very often. As a permanent member of the UN Security Council and the member of the Steering Committee on the Framework Agreement for Peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we know for sure that Christian Schmidt is not and has never been a high representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This position remains vacant for almost 2 years. The UN is well aware of the appointment procedures on this high international position. The date on peaceful agreement was affirmed by the resolution of the UN Security Council in 1995. The decision of this body during a rotation of high representatives on Bosnia and Herzegovina has no alternative. We can just recall that with regard to Christian Schmidt, the UN Security Council has not adopted any decisions. And among these irrefutable facts, it's quite logic that the things that Christian Schmidt is doing on his own in Bosnia and Herzegovina has nothing to do to implementation of the Framework Agreement for Peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina of 1995 and many other initiatives which are presented by the Office of the High Representative is a self-defense and self-reservation with all its legal effects. And in Russian language, there is a good word in Russian language with regard to Schmidt. This is an imposter. The Moldovan authorities continue to whip up anti-Russia hysteria. On the 25th of July, the Minister of Affairs of Moldova decided to summon Russia's ambassador to clarify information with regard to journalist investigations on the espionage with satellite equipment planted on the rooftop of the embassy. How can you comment this situation? Thank you. As you know, following the news information, I saw that the Moldova restricted the number of personnel. According to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Popescu, we believe that this is groundless, unfriendly action which receive a response. This is another step of destruction of bilateral relations on behalf of Chisinau regime. In its aspiration to show off in its Russophobic attitude, is the official Chisinau sets new records, and it's learning the practices of the Baltic and Ukrainian countries. The standard set of measures, which includes regular public insults against Russia, the ban of Russian mass media, discrimination against the position of the Russian language, has been added by new forms of fight against the Russian threat. I believe these are another obstacles to implement by the Russian its duties by the diplomats. In particular, they encourage domestic Russophobia. The Moldovan public was outraged by a recent event when the head doctor of the Chisinau hospital called a patient an enemy that deserves shooting because he addressed to him in Russian. I'm sorry, where are all these human rights observers, all these human rights organizations? Is there anyone in Chisinau, in official Chisinau, who can say that runs contrary to the official position of authorities of the Moldovan state?
The health minister did not condemn this action and try to justify his actions. Maybe in a couple of days they'll give him a reward. As you understand, they need nationalists in Moldova. We're speaking about nationalists. We're not speaking about nationalists that want some national development, but we're speaking about nationalists that treat people like this because of their nationality or religion. As for the so-called investigation that you mentioned with the accusations of Russian embassy in Chisinau and the activity of its employees, it's a fantasy that has nothing to do with reality. Our diplomats and our office in Moldova strictly implement the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961, and the main goal of this investigation is to escalate anti-Russian hysteria for new unfriendly actions against our country and to reduce the number of diplomats in our embassy. They are creating the basis for it. Russia is not interfering to internal affairs of other states. We support development of friendly and mutually beneficial relations with Moldova, and we know that Moldavian citizens know it, and they're against any anti-Russian initiatives of the government. I have one question. German elite said that German media said that German elites do not support the policy of the country. How would you comment such attitudes among the German elites? I think that this is the question of for German public. They should give evaluations to the policy of their government. You said that this is being discussed publicly, but if we see it from other side, we see a real diversion, a real sabotage committed by the government against their own public. And this is what happened after some imposed decisions, from my point of view, through people who came to power in Germany with the help of Western supervisors that fully follow the interests of the US and not Germany. And this economic collapse that we see in Germany, no one expected it. It was one of the leading economies in the world. Of course, official Berlin has broken Russian-German energy cooperation. This is what I can speak about from our point of view, from our side. This interaction in many ways provided energy to Germany, and now the producers in Germany don't have one of the main advantages that they had. So now we see that they're voting with their feet. We see that the industry is leaving Germany, leaving for the US, and the US were the cause of the breaking of all these ties, of all these chains. They were making Germany to stop using Russian energy resources, and then they would just said that they will destroy the Nord Stream, and that is what they did. And then they started to attract German business to the US, creating advantages for them. So that is what we see, and German authority could have prevented this. And of course, if we see that people speak about the 360-degree turn, maybe it means that they do not see these obvious things. But I'm sure that not everyone is like this there. So this is it. Let's continue. Moscow, Baku, are you here? I have several questions. First of all, the president of Azerbaijan evaluated positively the relations between Russia and Azerbaijan in the context of international turbulence, and he positively assessed the implementation of declaration. We support the words of the president of Azerbaijan. After this declaration on allied interaction was signed, our ties are developing on a qualitatively new level. Our partnership, according to this document, will be comprehensive. Cooperation of Russia and Azerbaijan, of course, is one of the key elements of stability in the Caucasus. The next question, as you know, that Russia works as intermediary, and there are different intermediaries between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the process of negotiations. There is need for contacts with civil society and other types of contacts. How can we make this process of moving towards each other more positive and more effective? I think we're doing everything we can do for this. The process of reaching peace between two peoples that neighboring Russia is very important to us. As it was said on the 31st of October 2022, it is necessary to form positive atmosphere, to continue dialogue between experts, religious leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia with the help of Russia, and to start trilateral interparliamentary contacts to consolidate trust between the peoples of two countries. The normalizing situation is very complicated, but there is no alternative to peace. These issues were discussed at the trilateral meeting of the foreign ministers of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. And we hope that the contacts will also take place in the future months. The monitoring mission of the EU on the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia is becoming wider, and it includes also Canada, that is not member of the EU. The Foreign Minister of Armenia said that Yerevan expected more from CSTO because of the border incidents between Armenia and Azerbaijan. How can you comment on this? We have stressed repeatedly that the EU mission in Armenia is based on geopolitical opposition to Russia. We're not talking about normalizing relations with Baku and Yerevan. I think that there is only escalation of relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and this mission has not provided any stability to the relations. That is why we think that one of the main mechanisms of de-escalation is the work of a bilateral commission to delimitate border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. On the 12th of July, the fourth meeting of this mission took place, and we support its work. Canadians in Armenia means that the EU has lost its independence in foreign policy, and now it is serving to the interests of the EU and NATO. It explains why the EU mission in Armenia, that has around 100 people, needs a couple of Canadian experts. What are these experts? We know what they are. We know about Canadian peacekeeping very well. Such experts from Canada since 2015 were actively preparing Ukrainian militants in the context of UNIFIR operation. As for the contacts of Armenian officials with Pentagon, we see that NATO, US and Turkey included, show high interest to Southern Caucasus, and we think that if NATO is implicated into the situation in the region, it will destabilize the region and will not be able to reach peaceful settlement for a long time. Thank you. CHIයෙන්, China, are you here? Yes, we're here. We have two questions. Recently, it was the 12th meeting of the security representatives of BRICS. What do you think about the role of BRICS in world security, and what can you say about the what Van E said about not making internet the place for digital Iron Curtain? On the 24th of July, there was a meeting with the also participation of Belarus, Burundi, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Cuba, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, that are friends of BRICS. They spoke about the settlement of conflicts, fighting terrorism, ensuring information, food, water and energy security, reports on fighting terrorism, ensuring security in the sphere of use of ICTs was presented. Many delegations spoke about the threats to sovereignty presented by the technologies of color revolutions, the use of unilateral sanctions, the use of economic pressure on government, having independent foreign policy. All of these global problems, they need collective solutions with the potential of all 5 countries. More than 40% of population live in our 5 countries, and that is why BRICS has a very important role in world stability. We speaking about the work on national level as well as in the format of the 5 countries. That is why it is important to increase coordination of the states to create indivisible architecture of security based on international law, taking into account concerns of all the countries on the basis of a good neighborliness for development. This is one of the main goals of our association. We're ready to work with all the partners, first of all with the partners from Global South and East, to form a more just, predictable and secure world. And we fully support the idea that internet should not be a place for digital Iron Curtain. It is, and we see that the US and their satellites want to create internet barriers, and they want to continue to work into international sphere, trying to restrict other states. They are creating a declaration about the future of internet, and only those who support Washington, the so-called democracies, will have a right to govern the internet, and others will not have this right. This fully supports our evaluations on segmentation of internet that we presented about the creation of lines in the internet. We have given this prognosis several years ago. On February, on the Summit for Democracy, they went even further. The authoritarian regimes will not have any access to any internet technologies. In fact, we're speaking about real fragmentation of global network and about this neo-colonial approach. We do not support such approaches, and we will respond firmly. We support the forming of equal and transparent model of internet governance, respecting sovereign right of every state to regulate their own national segment of the network. This is what we talked about in the context of Tunisian program. Despite the opposition of the US, they do want to lose their control over the internet and its core servers. We will continue to make efforts to implement Tunisian document. We think that such progressive actions is an important contribution to fight neo-colonial policy in information space. Atomic submarine Los Angeles, US Annapolis, entered Korea on the 24th of July at the island of Jeju. And just 3 days before this, another submarine with ballistic rockets, Ogayo, US Kentucky, left from Busan. They wanted to conduct exchange activities in the honor of 70th anniversary of South Korean and American alliance. What does Russia think about such very often events between US and Korea? We follow the situation on the Korean Peninsula. The situation there is escalating because of the US and Republic Korea and Japan that are implementing their plans to deter DPRK. Washington is creating this atmosphere of lack of stability in this region. They're using their strategic potential for this. Such steps do not have something to do have nothing to do to solve the problems in the region. Moscow Post, are you here? Yes, here we have 3 questions today. Oscar Kunajbek, the citizen of Kyrgyzstan, who was convicted for participating in the special military operation, asked Russian authorities for help. Have you responded to his appeal? As I understand, he asked one of the deputies of the State Duma for citizenship. That is what we know right now. Thank you. The next question. Last year, this investigative committee started a case about the massive shooting of Russian prisoners. The OSCE Bureau spoke about this last year. What does it mean? What ties Russia and OSCE have today? Has Russia anything to do with the topic of the prisoners? We don't have any contacts with OSCE. We don't have any ties. We are one of the founding members of the OSCE. We are a member of OSCE. OSCE doesn't have any mandate about the prisoners, about their situation. OSCE has many opportunities to show itself. If journalists are killed, this is what OSCE should speak about. Ms. Ribera is not a professional at all. Maybe someone can help her, maybe someone from the OSCE Secretariat. And the third question, Russia and Finland are reducing their diplomatic presence. General Consulate of Finland will be closed in St. Petersburg. And Helsinki has started a procedure of legal investigation, and the Russian consulate may be closed on Åland Islands. And some Finnish ambassadors in Russia think that the Treaty of 1940 is insulting. What do you think about this? The presence of Russian consulate on the Åland Islands is enshrined in the international law. That is why this treaty must be implemented by its participants. It is one of the documents that establishes demilitarized status of these islands, and the consulate of Russian Federation controls it. We're speaking about the peace treaty that was signed in 1947 by Finland and other allied states in Paris. Before this, Finnish party officially confirmed its commitment to implement the obligations in this context. I hope that Helsinki will continue to implement this treaty and will not weaken the architecture of security in the region that was almost completely destructed when Finland joined NATO. But I think we should ask this question to Finland. Verelka, are you here? Yes, we're here. We have two questions. The first is about the negotiations. Yesterday, was any agreement reached to deblock Artsakh? You know, yesterday this was commented by Sergei Lavrov. I do not have anything to add to his comment. It was less than a day ago, less than 4 hours ago. There was a call to stop the blockade of Artsakh. I can repeat just what I've just said. And the second question, what is on the table of negotiations? Maybe Russia will present its own plan of settlement of this conflict. Well, yesterday, Sergei Lavrov spoke about this in detail. Nothing has happened in a couple of hours that could be presented as a piece of news on this topic. All of his comments are relevant. Yesterday's declaration was not something that was something else. I'm just presenting our official position. It was presented by the Foreign Ministry.
Do we have Open TV Greece with us? Yes, Maria Vladimirovna. Greece is suffering from wildfires. People are dying, civilians, and the mass media and social networks are actively remembering cooperation and aid provided to Russia a couple of years ago by the president of the Russian Federation. We understand the complicated political landscape, but I would like to know, was there any contact, even unofficial, with Greece this time? Would Russia respond to such possible request on behalf of the Greek government? First of all, we are solidary with the Greece people in connection with the wildfires, as well as with the death of the aircraft crew on the 25th of July. We have not received any requests, assistance requests from Athens, so I can hardly make any comments. All the requests on assistance in firefighting are reviewed in due course, but we have not received official requests from Greece. As you know, in August 2021, upon the decree of the President of the Russian Federation to the emergency response, Greece received a donation as a part of helicopters and aircraft to help fight wildfires. Along with this amphibious helicopter contributed a lot in fight against this natural phenomenon. Our firefighters received a high assessment of its works, and I would like to underline, so this time we have not received such requests from Greece, official requests. Do we have Andalou with us? Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We have two questions. The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, said that Wagner asks to see Poland. Is this question discussed at the level of the Minister of Foreign Affairs? Is it possible that Wagner, who showed as unreliable partner, can organize a kind of provocation? And what would be the probable response of Moscow? I think that's the question to be addressed to Poland. But Russia will be accused. Is Russia can be accused of such a provocation? They will tell something. We will reply. To be serious, let us not make comments on this hypothetical presuppose. Let us focus on realities. So thank you. And the second question. The South African mass media said that France did not receive invitation on the BRICS summit in Johannesburg this year. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs reaffirm that this invitation was not sent to Paris? And how can you comment on the mass media report that President of France was denied in his invitation to summit? As you know, the invitation is the prerogative of the presidency in coordination with all the participants of this association. As for the Russian position, we have voiced it for several occasions. We believe that it is inadvisable to see the BRICS representatives who follow hostile to Russia's policy, who pursue a neocolonial policy of against Russia. Our association has been established to increase the role of developing countries in the multipolar world, to elaborate collective, creative, unifying avenues of the agenda for the whole international community. And we are persuaded that participation in the summit of BRICS of the President of France will not contribute to implementation of these tasks. Unfortunately, I believe that France has nothing to propose to this organization. Thank you. Newsroom, are you with us? On my first question, it was said that during the summit in St. Petersburg, Moscow will propose to the African countries the solution to food supplies after termination of a grain deal. How can you plan to address this issue, in particular with the supplies of mineral fertilizers? As you know, these questions received a detailed answer by Vershinin at his briefing on the 21st of July. We'll make a reference, a link in the text of our today's briefing to that briefing held on the 21st of July. Please have a look at it once again. My second question. In the recent assessment of the Minister of Foreign Affairs says that he welcomes. Does Moscow see that I have just answered? And I can repeat. Unfortunately, Brussels, in particular the EU and the United States, do not show the mediation efforts that would lead to positive results in the region. Unfortunately, all that is done by them leads to destabilization. That's not the exception for this region. I would like to draw your attention to the comment of our minister. If you don't have any questions, and all the other questions, we will answer them further. So see you soon. I wish you good luck. Bye.